Just gonna set some things up real fast. All right. Just gonna look at some really interesting things. I'm gonna play a little sample of something that I thought was interesting.
24, it said, Jehoiachin was 18 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 3 months. At that time, the office of Nebuchadnezzar, king went down to the entrance of the building, and it was in association with this staircase that he found a cache of almost 300 cuneiform tablets. Okay, this is a modern staircase, but it comes down where the ancient staircase came down. Cultivate was excavating here when he found what I consider to be the most important discovery in Babylon that connects to the Bible. He found a stash of cuneiform tablets. So what these tablets ended up being is basically ancient receipts. So it was the palace administration that was giving out rations mainly to prisoners. And so it was a list of what they had given, oil or grain, and whom they had given it to. Because this is the nature of these tablets, they're often referred to generally as the ration tablets. Mentioned on multiple tablets is a very significant name and title. So as an example, the translation from one of these tablets says, 10 selah of oil to Yakin, king of Judah, 2.5 selah of oil to the sons of the king of Judah. And basically, Yakin is a condensed version of the name Jehoiakim or Jehoiakim. Okay, so this is very significant because Yakin, king of Judah, in the ration tablets, is Jehoiachin, king of Judah, in the Bible. So,
All right, so this is actually really interesting. This is actually a really interesting find because what you had talked about this a while back, and I think it's important to know that Israel was scattered throughout the upper nations. They were scattered throughout the north, right? So we will find them like scattered jewels throughout different areas, like especially like Babylon and stuff like that. I'm just gonna open up a note here and get pinpoint because I love this. I don't know why, but this time frame is so pinpoint, and the amount of history in it is just amazing. Now, let me just point out here. So I want to point out really interesting. One is interesting. They talk about how a lot of the drought or things are drying up and stuff and whatnot, and they're starting to find things when you have a drought. Sometimes certain places that were off limits, like for example, a while back, a place called Tel Halula had flooded. So I'm hoping that that kind of clears and get a look at that. But that's in the Euphrates, so that's kind of interesting to think about that. So, beloved family, if you have any questions, statements, or anything, this is just a random. Just have a random holy conversation. But I'm just gonna go to a note here that I need to open here. So today we're going to be pointing out some interesting things. Just want to point out three interesting things that people already probably know about, but just a little more insight into some things. What's interesting about Jehoiakim, if you notice in the video, it's talking about him having multiple names. It's not that there are multiple names, just basically different ways of saying the same name. That I just want to show something right here real fast. All right, so obviously we know about Jehoiakim, his right. Jehoiachin is going to be the son of Jehoiakim. Also, Jehoiachin, right? As soon as Nebuchadnezzar comes in, right? The historic Nebuchadnezzar the second coming, right? He comes right in and then he besieges the place, right? He takes the father and sons. But let me actually point this out here. All right. All right. So this is actually going to be one piece to know about. So he has a couple different styles of his name. You could say Jehoiachin, or the different ones like Conan and different things like that, Jaconan, different things like that. And also, he had a similar way of saying his name, just like how his dad's name is. So what's interesting is these finds are pointing out a certain time frame, about close to the end of 599, 598, to getting to the end of 550 or 586, which is really interesting because this is one find that's interesting right here, where he talks of pretty descendants of David, right, that were exiled and they were settled about in the area of the Medes and Babylon. That's kind of interesting when you think about that they be settled in those areas, which I'm going to show something today with that. Also, there was another thing that was found. Uh, Ishmael, what would they call it? In fact, I already have it. I already got the information that I want to go it directly, because I need to show two things. Two things I need to show. First is papayas. So that connection to Israel being in the land of, so this little video, the reason why this was interesting is letting you know about the biblical narrative kings being taken by the historical Nebuchadnezzar, which we know is also mentioned in the book, and then taking that king, and it's also written in the book that that king survived, and it also has a receipt in Babylon giving that king a ration of oil and stuff to the king of Judah, right? This is found in Babylon. If you haven't seen this video, I'll put it in the description so you can see it. This just came out today, but they talk about something that a lot of people knew about, that they found multiple tablets of writings of Jews and people being in the lands of Babylon, right? Living there for a while. And it went in the same transition as we see in the scripture, right? So it's very, very interesting with this one. And also, there was another thing that was found. So on my About Me, I have this right here, our holy conversation. Is a conversation that's very focused on finding, a lot of things biblically centered. Now, I want to talk about something that was just found that was really interesting. It's this papayas. So this papayas, I'm not going to open up these, but I'm just going to show kind of highlights of what's going on here. People probably already seen this. This is actually something that I think is very, very interesting, because it's something that dates all the way to the time of pretty much the first temple period, and is using Paleo Hebrew. So that's kind of interesting too. It's not using the block Hebrew that when the time of Ezra came, when the Persians were there, after the Jews were taken to Babylon and stuff, they start writing with a block Hebrew, like a later Hebrew, and that Hebrew had a lot of connections to the Aramaic. But this one is going to be that early Paleo Hebrew, which is kind of interesting. And this will be used a type of style that was used during the first temple period. But what's interesting is it mentions the biblical name Ishmael. Now we know that Ishmael in that time, there was actually a couple different people that had the name Ishmael. We even have a time in Jeremiah when there was a Ishmael who set up the seed royal, who actually had caused some commotion real fast in the book of Jeremiah. Also in the book of Chronicles and Kings, it's recorded about this individual. But this is actually kind of interesting because about this time frame, we would actually see where this paper writing about Ishmael, uh, which is kind of interesting. It matches with some seals. I just want to read you something interesting from a seal that we had found, dating to about that time. It says, this is what it says on the seal. It says, it also appears as the name of the official on paleographic finds, such as pretty much this one stamp, the Billy stamp, pretty much this clay stamp seal, used for sealing royal documents in the administration of the Kingdom of Judah. For example, the Bulle reading This what one of the stamps we're reading. These bullets are pretty much like they're like sealed. They're like rings, pretty much, and you can have them as a seal. They like seal a document, and this is what one of them read. It said, "To Ishmael, son of the king." Right, it's kind of interesting. The present document probably certified uh, dispatchment either to or from Ishmael, right? Because it would say to Ishmael, son of the king. So if it's saying to him, it's probably saying it's writing a letter to someone by the name of Ishmael, who's probably having some ties to being a son of a king, right? So that's kind of interesting to note that was something that was found also in the land of Judah. It's kind of interesting. And this papayas, this one just found is called the Ishmael papayas. That's what it's called. It's called the Ishmael papaya. That's what they call it. You could probably find it here. All right. A lot of them are talking about it. It was 1 day ago or 2 days ago, just recently, right? They had to verify it and everything, so verified and whatnot. So it's kind of interesting. Get a little of it and everything. They also have some papayas of that time that also mention Jerusalem, right? Jerusalem or Jerusalem or Jerusalem, right? That's actually kind of interesting too, because that lets us know about the first temple, right? About the first temple, where we will get at that time the Jews being scattered from that land. Though it seems that some would say there's not a lot of evidence for it to be a kingdom in that land, right? So I thought that was really interesting because it's actually evidence of things that were happening in the first at the first temple. Is writings. I want to show this last part of this ending of this little video that this person says here. The archaeologists they're kind of give at some parts. So I think what this person says here is kind of interesting. Just hear this last piece right here. Just a little piece here.
וזוהי כמובן החשיבות שלו, הנדירות של העובדה הזו מבחינת
The papyrus was taken in the 60s to the U.S. after it was purchased by a woman who was here visiting Israel, who took time to actually spend time on excavations. So she was actually interested in archaeology, and she purchased this papyrus. She took it back to the U.S. Where she used adhesive glue and glued it, and then framed it so that she could hang it in her home. This is the way. Because the papyrus is stuck onto the back of this framing, we cannot remove it, because removing it will actually cause further damage to the papyrus. But all in all, the text is relatively well preserved. We have about 4 lines of text written in Paleo-Hebrew, so ancient Hebrew script, which was typical of the First Temple period. Any small fragment of documentation that we get here is really, 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 it's a high. I can't even explain it. As an archaeologist, we're constantly leaving finds were left behind in the past, and they're all extremely important to us, but there's no doubt that when we come to the written word, it's another level. We actually can make a much, much closer connection to the people living in the past, and so it's very, very, very exciting on the one hand.
All right, so those are some two very interesting finds. Now, I will have one more find that I want to point out. So, here's a brother page that goes over some very deep things. I want to point out some things real fast on something here on his sources that we were talking about. I just want to point out something with 2 branches here. I found a couple snips. What's interesting is, as I've been talking about this E1B1 line, I found out that there's certain snips of the E1B1 family that I think point more closer to maybe like a Israeli lineage. For example, if I just look up M2, which is a snip that actually broke off from pretty much P2. And after P2 splits very early on in the Middle East, we actually had this line actually migrate downwards through pretty much Egypt, going deeper into the lands of the continents of the African plate. They also go downwards from the lands of Levant through the lands of Yemen down into what is called ancient Abyssinia, which is now Ethiopia, and actually circumnavigate that area. It's actually important to know that. But what's important is a lot of reasons why we have certain hot spots of this lineage is because you got to know the history behind this lineage. There's actually something important to know about this lineage and its SNPs. That though we have hot spots down here, is actually highly known that this line actually would start over here. So the larger number does not equate origin. For example, if we look closely into the land of Levant, there's nothing here yet. But let's actually zoom in and get a little more detail onto what's happening here in the Levant. Now, what you actually would notice over here, you actually will find lineage scattered throughout this area. And one of the SNPs that this actually is this is actually going to be what's going to be known as a M2 branch. Now, I want to actually show you something because this actually will show us what's going on the YD when we think about these things. And since this is actually pointing to it, I'm just going to right here. All right. So now I just want to point out something with the SNPs here, with the types of SNPs that it has going on here. Just going to close this and get back over here. It's also important to know because I think that as these years get closer and closer and genetics are actually showing us deeper origins, I think that as we go about these things, we can start to get a little more detailed on origins of people, on where do they come from and where do they go, different things like that. I'm gonna now put SNP on here. So now this actually shows us where it is, this SNP here. So it lets us know, yes, it's in Lebanon. And if we look closely, we can see how far ago the SNP will go. For example, this one will bring us to about the time that this SNP should have been somewhere in this area. If we think about the biblical narrative, if we take 2,000 off of this number, this is years before present, so 3,500 years before present, 2,000 off of that. That'll take us to about 15 BC, 14 BC. So we should expect this line to be in about that area. That's actually important to know that is in Lebanon, right? And if we look close, we can actually understand something about some of these SNPs, is that we actually would have evidence of this line actually being in this area. I think it drives closer and closer to the biblical narrative because we're finding some deep origins of these lines. But remember, the Israelites, they would be like a scattered group. They wouldn't be a large group that would be there. You wouldn't suspect to find large numbers of them, but you can find subtle evidences of them. But that's that they're so small. You got to look carefully. And that's the thing about going about these things. Now, I did find also SNPs to point out real fast. I wanted to point out some interesting things of some SNPs that I thought was important. For example, this one. Now, this one's really interesting because this is when I was talking about that the Jews had went over into the lands of pretty much Japan, and they settled in the lands of Mongolia, and then they would be settled on some of the islands. And this line right here, I'm going to do something later with this SNP. There's a mutation that mostly has settled over here. We would have area of it in the area of the Philistines. Now, this is interesting because I expected this. This is what I was expecting because when I was studying on the Pacific slave trade, I seen a coast called West Guinea. I knew that coast was named by the Portuguese. And if the Portuguese was there, they had to be traveling with this certain lineage that was that natural E1, B1 lines that they naturally would take into captivity. So I was wondering if there would be some over here, and I did find some over here, which was kind of interesting to take note of. That line be obviously misplaced, went from somewhere else to somewhere else. So that's kind of interesting to note that it had made some movements like that. Now, also what I found really interesting was some snips that never went into the lands of Africa. Now there's some whole families. There's whole families from this line. For example, this whole family line apparently never went into Africa. It mostly was in Saudi Arabia. And they mostly found this whole snip. It wasn't like they found one here, then one here, then one here or something. They only found them over here. And I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting, just finding one family line that only in the lands of Arabia. So I wanted to see if there was any others, and they had some 2002 updates that they updated on the Google, and you can see there's some new ones that they're finding. They're finding more in Arabia and some in Kuwait. They're finding more and more lines of this actually in these areas. Here's some more. We can actually get a good idea of what's going on there and the ones that settle in these areas. So they found one up here. Now, if we look at this closely, if we zoom in looking closely, we can see that right here in this little area. Now, that's really close. As you can see, Iraq is right there. And then we would have right over here, Iran. So this little area here, I had talked about this before that, I had suspected, this line was close to Israel. They would have ties to both these sides because there was Shemites over here. They were stretched over here. And I was wondering if this one would be more the southern Shemites and the E1B1B group would be more of the northern Shemites. You have more of the northern Shemites, you have the southern Shemites. And this group seemed like more the one that would travel more southern down the line and actually be settled lower. But some of them have stayed up in this little area. But the mutations, as you can see, newer snips being found, more family around this area contest to a very detailed story that really paints a really scattered line out and about. And now I kept on looking. This is more, and there's much more. There's much more snips, but I wanted to kind of leave it like that because as I went through all the snips, I seen there was much more families that looked just about like this, and they started kind of up in these upper areas as I went through more and more snips of it. I can see here that you can have some right in this area. So I wanted to get a little more detailed on the groups over here. And it was the exact snip that I was expecting to find, which would be of the line that I suspected to be the one in San Tome, the Jews, the M191, which is actually E1B1A7. This one actually is suspected very much to be the line that I was expecting to find there. So I find this family here to be very interesting. So you can see right here, if I just take a look at it on the chart, I can see that this one, as I said, this will be the one that would have connections to the southern Shemites. And I had talked about this story, how we actually have multiple documents that talks about many of the Jotanites, who were brothers of the Eberites, had mixed in with the Sabaeans, which is the Sabaeans is basically a group. If you know, like in the book of Job and everything, it's actually known that pretty much if we look at the book of Job and different historical documents, the Jotsonites moved down the Red Sea. They moved down the Red Sea and went through Yemen, down Yemen into what is called ancient Abyssinia. Abyssinia is actually a Semitic nation. As pointed out to before, we got multiple documents that tell us Abyssinia was Semitic. Had a lot of Semitic connections. And a lot of them actually this became a very wealthy area. That's why if you go through history, note the Nubians. The Nubians are extremely strong. They're an extremely strong nation and they're a mixed nation. If you look at the genetics, this Sunday, y'all, maybe we'll go over the as you say the how you say that the Hyksos and the Habaru and all that stuff, right? If you already know, right, most people already understand the summary, right? Those are not the Israelites, but those are going to be groups that you got to look at closely to find out who they are, and they'll sum down. It's kind of like a game of the puzzles, right? You put the pieces together, and you can start to find what is that lineage, what is that line, right? So this one's really interesting because this shows us that this line is up there, that they're finding more and more of that family actually being settled up in these areas in the north. So that's kind of important to know as we look at these things because you're gonna get a more and more picture the more you look at it outly, right? And if I even zoom in on the location, you'll notice that it actually multiplies. Notice how much it actually is. What is going on here? The more I looked out, I just thought to myself, what am I seeing? What am I really seeing? What is going on with this lineage? What's the story behind this whole family? Look, why is it in a circle? Why is this happening like this? Right? What's going on here? So I'm looking deeper and deeper, and this is just when you think about it, obviously, there's something going on here. Deeper going on in this land over there, and started to have a little settlement over here. And this is some stuff I was actually doing some research on some of the Jews that moved into the areas of Arabia and everything. But it seems like that they had a little base, maybe some shields, maybe some strength around there, and close out the area, and had their main men in the center because there it is, the Jews again, the M191, right? And when I say M191, this is a SNP mutation of a tree, a certain SNP on this family line. There's other SNPs here, but this is the one that I suspected to also find as a Jews in 191. And there's some other ones here too, some other SNPs and stuff. So there's a lot of interesting things going on in this little area right here. And I found some historical documents to go over this, and I'm going to save that a little bit to later, but I just want to show some interesting highlights that I think about these little areas that I think we got to look a little more closer into this line. All right. What happened real fast? That long. All right. So that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking that we got to look a little more closer into these SNPs and look at these towns here because there's a lot of towns, and I'm pretty sure they all have a backstory and they all got something going on different with them. As you can see, so they probably has something going on here. So this is really interesting how this is just circling in this little area here, and you probably wouldn't even notice it. You know, at first you probably wouldn't notice it. There's also some over here we're gonna look at, but I'm gonna just zoom out again so you can see this. Right? You see how they're all there, then boom, and where to go? Where to go? Almost look like it's a different story because you go down here and you think that they've been here for a while, but actually we can actually show what happened with all these things, especially in this area, how they get over here. The Portuguese and the Arab movements at the first century, because we know that the lines that were here actually trace over here 2,000 years ago. That's very important. So this is the line. These are the SNPs that I believe to have some ties, no doubt, as they all have been scattered from this land, right? From the lands of what we see as the promised land. They say the promised land, right? So this is where I believe that we mostly settled in these areas. And when we look at the SNPs, we can get a good understanding of the foundation of these roots. We can get very good understanding of them, especially when we break each one of them down. Just one more I'm gonna put on here. All right. So right here you can see Palestine. They say Hebron, right? Hebron, right? Of course, Hebron, right? Why wouldn't it? Why wouldn't it be at Hebron? But notice also where it has ties to Northern Africa. No doubt, also would have ties to the ones over here. But as you can see, this line, this whole line, it would be very easy for it to migrate to over here or anywhere down here because the migration during all the conquests would have been obvious. To when I say obvious, just understand what I'm saying here, right? Let me just I'm bring out a picture while I explain what I'm going to say because, like I said, when we're talking the history and all that stuff, we're getting detailed, pinpoint, accurate, right? Deep, pinpoint, accurate history that actually would tell a very clear story of what's going on here, right? Let me just show something real fast that we was kind of noting with. So about the time of 586, there's an interesting migration that we note with the land of the Levant. Now, why is this important? Because if the cattle move, if there's a massive migration of cattle, right? Are they going to move by themselves? It's possible, but not natural farming animals. They're not going to just all move uniformly together. They're not going to all move uniformly together. But let me show you something. What I'm saying here, we know without a doubt we was finding this certain subgroup of animal haplogroups, and we were following them at the time of the fall of Jerusalem. At the time of fall of Jerusalem, all the cattle, almost all the cattle was one haplogroup. In the time of Israel, when Israel was there, when the first temple was standing, almost every single cattle was not just the same cattle. They were the same breed of cattle. They were the same family of cattle, the same cattle. And they were this T1 haplogroup of the cattle, right? And what happened was all of a sudden, after 586 BC, which we know that's when Jerusalem is destroyed, there's a migration of all those cattle. Every single one of them migrated downwards. And then some other of the like cattle from the south, from the north, and some of the pig from the north came down and started to dwell in these little areas. But most of the cattle that was in the land of Levant went south. And we expressed how the biblical narrative expressed how a lot of them went south, right? We expressed how Jeremiah word for word told us the exact way that they went. When they left downwards, when God said don't, but they went downwards past the lands of pretty much Egypt. They went down south to Pathros. They went south. They kept going south, deeper into to Egypt and Africa. And guess who was coming after them? Nebuchadnezzar. He was coming after them, just like that happened with Assyria. Assyria went all the way down here as well. But Nebuchadnezzar, right? He came down and besieged them. So no doubt they were scattered, at least in a BC time, in the lands of Africa. That's one of those things that when as we express with these things, it's important to know that this line will go there. But the interesting thing is the line that mostly has a large portion. Yes, it seems in modern times, not in ancient times, but in modern times, we have a lot of them in these areas now. But we also had them in the north, and actually in a large quantity in some places. And these are just people who are willing to take the test, right? These are people that are willing to test or had got the test taken from them, right? That could be way more. That could be easily way more and in different places. But this is just nice to know that we had diversity with deep that will bring them to the Israelite time frame. We find them in the locations where they are. This will bring them right to where we should find them. in these different areas. So that's kind of important to note. We'll find them here. So you can see, obviously, in the lands of Egypt. So we would have this one over here, right? Here, Egypt and America. So this one got some connections to Egypt and America. So Egypt and America. You know what's interesting about that? You know, it's weird that, the one of the Air Force companies have made a little design of pretty much a Egyptian style mummy's head. You probably know what I'm talking about with a NASA thing, the little design they went with. Kind of interesting. Close this real fast. All right, so back to that little piece, because a little deeper into it, you can notice some interesting things about these snips. You can notice some very interesting things about these snips is that we're seeing a common family kind of scattered board, kind of scattered everywhere, pretty much, but not major in an area. They're not actually. If you look deep into to roots and stuff, you find out that they're not the oldest in Africa, nor are they the oldest in the areas of Eurasia. They're like a new lineage that comes about and is scattered about, right? Very, very scattered about. Let's look at this snip real fast, a little deeper in. All right, so again, Egypt and America. There's a little similar tie with the other one. Same thing with that snip. That's just interesting in itself because it just lets you know of the distance that this line actually did. So you can see this line goes into there. So very, very interesting. These are the ones that I'm interested to look into, especially these areas here. Like this little area here. We'll look at this last place. So I thought that little area here was interesting. And I'll put this in the description. Maybe people already know about this, but this thing's kind of interesting. As you can see here. There it is, M19. Very interesting in this little area. See what these three are. M191. So that family. This is the one that I believe to be the Jews. Be honest with you. This is the M191 is exactly what I believe to be the Jews, unbiasedly. From my studies, from what we found. I think that the Shemites are obviously E1B1 lines, E1 lines, no doubt, or E lines, obviously. Still all Shemites. I think that the Yat lines are the split of Noah that are the Shemites, because we know that IJK is one family, and you have so much different people arguing about is T Jews, is J Jews, and you look at the full pictures, like they're both Japheth. They're both Japheth. IJK is Japheth. There's no problem. It's just accepting honesty. It's quite obvious, especially by the mutations. So this is the line right here that we have found to be those scattered about lineages. But you gotta look carefully. You gotta look carefully for these lines. You gotta look very carefully to find them. So there's more to them and everything, mostly in the areas of Spain. Some over here, no doubt, as we can see with some of the families over here. We have point out and everything. This one's a different SNP mutation, but you can see there's a couple of different ones here. It pretty much, when you see zoom in, because then it gets deep on those SNPs. Sometimes, yeah, just be careful. There's some little highlights on some lines that's important to know about where this line actually goes, and obviously summary, as these things always usually are. They're a nice summary of some portions. I wish there was a tool or something that shows all the lines at once or something like that, because then you'll see some interesting picture. You'll see what's really going on. As you can see, this one probably have this one here, I'm thinking. Yeah, right there. As you can see, that snip. So that's something that's to note, and that's the M191 line. So that's that same one. Very, very interesting. Very, very interesting. So I think the Portuguese had, if they moved that one, they had a certain taste for a certain said slave they would want. Just making sure I didn't here, because not really else up there. I'll just leave it like that. But there's some more, that's snips in some very interesting places that I think that, if you look at this picture like this, right, it may not seem like it was meant for that line to be down there and everything. I mean, you would think why would Jews be in the lands of Africa? And they'll say it came from and all that stuff. But the African territory was actually rich with resources for a long time, very rich with resources. That's why the nations will constantly try to divide it amongst themselves. It's just that it was not an easy area to pierce the strength of Nubia and Egypt. Those were powerful nations. But also be careful on looking at the lands of Africa and wondering if it is possible that Jews could be there. Because as we historical sources, we got to look in deep ancient finds, and we got to ask ourselves, if we're going to look at the life and the blood, what is this? Can we connect these things monophylactically, right, by the roots and nodes and everything? Can we also connect historical papers and everything to know what's really going on with these things? I think there's a lot of ways to tell. I don't think it's just genetics alone, but I do think there are a lot of different ways to find the evidence for the historical movements of thus said biblical characters. So, and even to this day, we are still seeing these biblical characters. The only problem with it is we have some challenges times, and those challenges is basically the fact that there had been a diversity of scattering that had happened, and that is very important to remember, that there has been a diversity of scattering of the people of the book, as even there has been a diversity of problems with some different doctrines that rise up in time. So this is actually something I think is important to note. I think these things are very important to know. So a question on, how can we get Jews in Africa? That different deep stories to know about. One of the biggest things to know about is, where did the Portuguese settle? What happened throughout, and where did the Portuguese actually settle? And the Portuguese had settled, as we had spoke about before, many different across the world, especially Africa, these different areas of Africa. And someone would say, why is that important? Because we actually know, even in the Bible, right? Paul wrote to Jews who was in Spain, desire to visit you, things like that, because we know Jews were settled in those areas recently. But there were some problems. Some problems had happened in that area, and some people had got into it. And what happened was, as we know, even with certain king decrees, certain decrees that we know that we have obvious evidence of certain decrees of movements of Jews, right? We actually know that there was actually decrees telling the Jews that they had to go pretty much south. For example, And this decree, it actually was pretty much at the end of the decree. This is what the king had said right here. He said after that period, they had to leave the country, although the king only allowed them to travel pretty much to Africa. He only allowed the Jews, when he was kicking them out of that area, to go into Africa. That's the only places where he was allowing them to go, deeper into the areas of Africa, pretty much. And that's something that we had known about when we was talking about pretty much the Jews being exiled from the lands of pretty much where you would have Iberia and whatnot, and a couple things like that. And we know that that area, that territory, would be filled with them, as other areas will be filled with them. But they get scattered. They get scattered all about. They pretty much get scattered all about into different areas, and following different evidences kind of tells you a very detailed story of what was happening and what had happened over time, because it pretty much it seals the deal and lets you know what's happening. You know, so when you see things like a picture of M2, and you see modern snips looking like this, you got to note that his family is still over here, and it actually is over here in ancient times with connection here to here. But the reason why it's over here is because modern snips tell us why, and also history of the Jews, the movement of the Jews, tell us why. For example, statement that I showed before by a historian, right? That we already had pointed out how he addressed where the Jews had went during the time of the Portuguese persecutions. Here's a good understanding of, if you want a quote of these things, this will be of these things.
Some of my research, if you read hybrid very attentively, you'll have to go to the footnotes. You will see there's got a lot of evidence produced for black Jewish communities in different parts of West Africa, which are not sort of based upon a particular reading of tribal history, let's put it like that, but are based on a fairly hard historical fact. And this hard historical fact is the expulsion of the Jews from Spain and from Portugal at the end of the 15th century, subsequent to which a lot of Jews settled, first of all, in northwest Africa, places like Senegal, in the islands, which I'm sure you know about, Saint Tomé and Principe.
Yes, sir.
Principally, and less known along the coast of Guinea, so that in the middle of the 16th century, 1560 to be precise, the Portuguese Archbishop of Goa in India proclaimed that Judaism is a kind of horrible illness which has killed millions of people throughout history, and the result of being Jewish was to in shame, to fail in everything, even among the black Jews of Guinea. So, in other words, the existence of Jews in the western part of Africa was absolutely accepted at the time by the likes of the Portuguese Archbishop of Goa.
So that family. So tomorrow I'll get on some more stuff. Brother wants me to go over a certain Havo group. I'll go over that with him. He's also in our Discord. I'm gonna point out some things, but I just wanted to make a quick highlight here. So, what did we today? Today, we seen the evidence that the
So of all discoveries that were made,
the descendants of the King David would have settled in the lands of the Levant around areas of Babylon, right? Nebuchadnezzar and all that stuff, right? And they would have been settled throughout the lands of the Medes and stuff, and it would have been scattered about and everything. And then by the time when Cyrus the Persian came, he made a declaration that they can return back to the land of Jerusalem. So the people came back to the land of Jerusalem and built the city. After 70 AD, it's important to know that the people were scattered about again. They stayed about in this area, about in the area of the pretty much the Arabian belt and or the Arabian Felix, pretty much these little areas here, and also different parts of Arabia. Many of the Jews settled in place of Oman and things like that. And then they had some problems after they came back, and they had the Bar Kokhba revolt. And then they had some more problems when Muhammad rised up and said, "Hey, can you guys convert to my religion?" And they said no. And Muhammad said, "Okay, I'm going to persecute you guys now." And some of them converted, some of them didn't, and most of them did not. Most of them did not, and they were being persecuted and pushed out, even out of places like Abyssinia. There was a Semitic group over here named Abyssinia. They was being pushed out of Abyssinia. I spoke about it, how after Muhammad, Al-Bakr started pushing a lot of these out of here. And that's why, if you note early, the height of Al-Bakr's kingdom and the kingdoms after him, the two next powers, Africa and Arabia, is controlled by by Islam, the people of Islam, pretty much. They all control this area and the upper areas of Africa, and to deeper areas of Africa. And there's deep history to go on Mansa Musa and a couple different things of the movements of the Arabians and the Israelites when they're going, what's going on in the lands of Africa from there. How there's a lot of persecutions in there. There's also more Jews that leave out of the lands of Portugal, that leave out of these areas. So we also know since the Mohammedans or the rule this area sweep through 711, right? So remember, Islam grew right over here in this area after 600s, right? And then after 711, right, AD, they came up here and they started ruling these upper areas right here. They start ruling here until they get pushed out about 1492. And that's also when the Jews are pushed out of here. But the Jews are being pushed out earlier. So there's a lot of historical documents understanding for this line. But new SNPs are painting the picture. So that's another thing for 2022. New SNPs of M2. And the fine Jehoiakim in the lands of lines of how you would say Ishmael, right? We talk about the Ishmael documents. What they call it, the papayas. So we talk about that too. Also, something that's kind of interesting that was literally just this week. These are things that are basically found out here this week. This is really interesting, I think. So about that with the Ishmael papayas right here. So interesting. A couple different historical documents and a lot of historical things in the Bible. It ties them all together into the certain land and by the name of the city. Ties them together in about the same time. So it's really to see. So the SNPs, this papayas, the Ishmael papayas, and the going over the documents. Very, very interesting stuff. I'll put some of this stuff in the description, and I will today again a little bit into the Hyksos and the Habaru, who they are. Right? They're not the Israelites. It's gonna be good to know a little bit of who they are genetically. A little bit. Enough information to go over now. and a historical document out. So very, very deep stuff. I think it's important to look at the full picture, or things might look a little blurred. So let's get into some things. Beloved family, real fast. I think I wanted to do this offline, but I'll point it out for you, brother, because this is a interesting snip. So this brother, I like this brother because he's a very honest brother. He is a J group, but he's in the land. You were just talking about the other day they lost a queen and got a king. Let me see. I'm gonna try to type this real fast. I gotta see real fast. JFA. Make sure I get it in my head so I can say it. FTCA99. I think I keep saying it wrong in my head. FTA 99330. Okay. Yeah, 99330. I'll show you what this snip is real fast. Because I made this a little earlier. Let me just open up a tool here, as I need a tool for that. All right, real fast. So now it's always important to note monophylactic families, right? Monophylactic family important. Very, very important. Make sure it's not one by root. Like it shouldn't be. All right. Let's just put it on here. Tell you what it is now. All right. So no, it's gonna be from J1. This snip is pretty much a group from J1. It's a long snip from it. But remember, J1 comes from IJ of IJK, which remember all IJK is one family. So this would be basically in a summary of what this one basically would be. There's a line that pretty much would have sold in different areas around. So they have some snips over here. If I go to descendants, you can see they basically, some of the snips, this later sons, they look like they settle over here. Then some of them migrate back to over here. So maybe they're basically moving around throughout what it looks like this little area. You say Iberia or Iberia, basically Italy, rather, and they're basically also settling in areas of the Zagros Mountains. So they're going to have some connections throughout these different areas. Look like obviously this snip will be in some of the areas connecting of, I would say, a little bit in these little areas here. And we can also see will be the focus of some of the snips of some that was found. They'll say it would be about this area in Arabia, the modern snips. If we go a little back to maybe a node, let's go to a nice node. Let's go about, let's go JP58, because this is a JP58 line. This one's that line that you got to be careful of, because this is the one the J groups they were trying to use and say was Jews. If they were Jews, they would be a mixed company with them. They would probably be the people of Tyre that mixed in with the Jews. It wouldn't be the Jews themselves because they were highly Indo-European. So this group, as you can see it obviously having a lot of connections to other areas. So this line yet has a nice portion over here, but most likely because they had connections to Tyre. But as we know, Tyre is Indo-European, and we also would this line would have connections with Russia, obviously in the areas of Finland, as I would expect, because JP58 line would start. The J line starts from here. It goes to Finland, and it goes back to Russia. It spreads. It splits here. It goes some to Turkestan to over here, and some to over here. Some go down through the lands of the Hittites and become some of the Phoenicians, and they settle there. And they actually become some of the later groups that settled there, and they actually end up becoming the main antagonists during the time of the Israelites. There will be some of the groups that settled there. We had spoke about that before when we talked about Ramses the second. This will be a close line to pretty much the Seti family, is what we would find. But this will be that group that kind of spreads large, because this is mostly as you would say, a Indo-European line that spreads pretty far, but it also goes a lot of places of Turkestan. Now, if we want to get a better picture of it, we need to look at the whole node. So if we go to J1, now this is going to be a split from J-M304. So J-M304 splits and makes J1 and J2. So you also could say J1 star and J2 star. Those will be the root nodes of those ones. So this will give us a good picture of where they actually are found mostly. And this will give us a good understanding of that family tie. But, to get a better picture, we have to look at IJ to get a good understanding of what they are, what they actually will, and everything. So here's a nice little picture, nice little spread. So definitely got a nice spread for modern times. It's got a summary on them. I'm pretty sure that there's way more of them over here, especially when we think about fossils and stuff. So this snip tracker has a few, but mostly they will be in the areas of Russia, in these areas. So there's actually something important to know, that these areas will be filled. All right. So that's pretty much something to know about. It's like a line that when you go and bring it to its ultimate node, right? If you bring it to, let's say, J1, right? You're looking at something like this. It's basically a line that's pretty much spread all aboard. So the best way to understand is that's a snip that would had settled as this snip is diverse. It would have had settled in recent times in these areas. But fossils would tell us more what this line is, because you don't want to look at it just today and say, well, that's all that we had seen it as, and not look at the fossils. So this line we had went into very deep. If you want to get a little more into that, brother, I'll give you a video where we went really deep into this direct line. Because this is J. What it really is this line, J-P58. J-P58. I'll just take away the one. There you go. So it's this basic line right here. And you can see it's no different, not that different from its earlier lines. Because if we go to like its total family from the IJ groups, I don't know if it's just going to show me if I put IJ star. No, I got to put, whoops. I mean, it did vanish that. Let's see. I gotta put the snip, the name of the snip on there. Let's see. On here, I just grab it real fast. Just to show the full picture there. Because this one, I know that I'm probably trying to figure out what's going on with that one. But I'll just show you this to make it clear there. I just need one the major groups, I think it's up here, rather. Here, I'll type it down. All right, so like these type of nodes are important. Like this one, GHIJK, that means GHI and all IJ and K groups will be connected by one node. That's important to know. HIJK is important too because HIJK connects H with all IJ and K groups. I mean, they're all one, they're all related. That's all that we know without a doubt. We got nodes of that. But I'm just gonna get a little more closer to it. IJK is important too. So IJKL15, I'll just remember that. IJKL15. IJKL15 is super key, important to know about because IJKL15 is going to tie all I and J groups together, right? Not just I and J, but K groups together. I mean, your T's, your R's, and all that. The reason why I'm saying is because I don't want you to get the reason why we look at SNPs of the DE groups is because notice something interesting about the DE groups. The interesting thing about the DE groups is that you're not just getting one family called DE or D and then an E1 and E2 and then that's it. Notice that they make a vast difference between E1B1B and E1B1A. Notice that. That's something. The reason why that's important is because that's a deep SNP. That's a deep SNP, right? It's a very deep SNP, and we know that it's going to lead us to one family. The interesting thing is that they'll try to separate E1B1A from its root node fossil lines. That's why we're looking at those SNPs because those SNPs is going to lead us to an obvious line that is clearly Semitic. E1B1B. E1B1B is clearly Semitic, especially when you link it to its finding of being Aramaean, and not just Aramaean, but deep Semitic in the Akkadians to many other groups, ancient groups. Not just that, but the large portion of Jews today have E1B1B. But that J group is the one that a lot of times that J and that T is where people don't understand how those groups work. So that's why it's important to know IJK. IJK is the biggest key to know about these groups. But we obviously talked about the difference of the splits, how A and B is a different group, D and E is a different group, and CF is a different group. So when I say CF is everything that makes IJ and K. So it's CF-P143. That makes GHIJK, HIJK, IJK, right? So that's going to give you your IJ group right here, right? You see this IJ right there? That's the one I wanted because that's going to kind of tell us something important here, right? So remember, when we look at that one line that we were just looking at, that was a JP to B8 line, right? And if I go to a root node, notice it's not that different. If I go to the root, I'm gonna go to its father line, deeper father line, and you can see right here. There you go. So you can see that this line would have some connections over here and over here as well. So it would root in spreading through all these areas, but we got to find out what it's connected to, right? For example, we see it's connected with I. So if we go and trace I's origin to its roots, we'll find out that it's Nordic, and we'll find out that that Nordic line is also Vikings, and we'll find out that it will have more closer ties to Indo-European, and that also will tie J into being Indo-European and Indo-Iranian, because we do find it as ancient Indo-European, Indo-Iranian. And that's important to know about root. So to understand the understanding of that SNP is that it would link to one Japheth's line of IJK. And it will also show us that it will be a line that will be basically in places of Italy, as well as we can find it as in the Levant today, because the multiple migrations. So multiple migrations, as we know. So very, very important with that. You need to understand on that, just to make it a nice little summary there, is that will be this family line to get a good understanding on it. So, if you wanted, is there something about that snip that you wanted to go over? But that's a little summary. I don't want to, what's the word I'm looking for? There's nothing wrong with someone being Japheth and all that whatnot. It's only wrong when someone is not accepting the truth, I guess. So it's all right if someone's Ham, right? Because it's only wrong if they don't accept the truth, and it's okay if someone being Shem. So all those things are okay. Just to make sure that's enlightened there. But I think it's important to find Israel. I think it's important and interesting because they are living historical peoples, and finding them takes pinpoint action. So as you can see, just to look at a good portion of the J group, if you notice, they're mostly Indo-European. There'll be ancient Indo-European lines that'll be settled in the north, pretty much. Though even if they was to move into the lands of the Levant, it would be mostly ties of Indo-European invasions, because at the same time they get there, R gets there and other groups get there. So we got to be careful on monophylactic families because there's a lot of steps, but when we point them to their node, it'll tell us origins. So just remember the F-M89 families, the GHIJK, HIJK, and IJK for the summary there. So as soon as you see is if you with the SNPs and all that stuff, the best thing I would say, as soon as you see if it's something under IJK, you should know that that's gonna be one family, right? That's just gonna be one family that's gonna be in different locations. So location doesn't equal origin, right? That's important. So even if you find a group in America or you find a group in Africa, you find a group in Europe, it won't equal origin unless we find the fossils. Look at the fossils, right? So something like Neolithic time frame and back will be talking origins, right? You're not talking origins if you're talking Bronze Age, Iron Age. It's not really talking origins because these lineages were here, said stretching close to Paleolithic. So we had to look at that in origins and stuff. And that's why I also talked about when I talked about Cain and Abel and all that stuff. And I talked about Seth and all that. And I spoke how they would have had early SNPs, like how people have today. And we can see that. So that's important to know, is that would be a separate family, what we would just talk about, but it would be of the J line of Japheth, of IJK. So very, very important. I think the clearest understanding of that brother would be indeed the I groups. I think they are a clear representation of the IJ family of what they would be rooted to. I think it wouldn't be no argument for it being Indo-European. I think I is clearly Indo-European. Um, IJ would be Indo-European. So I think if you want to know what it would root to, probably ancient Indo-Europeans that migrated close to, I would say, the Coraxis movements and filling more with the Sea People invasions into that land. So that's how I would say what that would be historically and snip wise. That's right. That's right. I is Nordic. That's true. What the brother is saying is absolutely true. Besides the WTF part, but it is right. He is right. Is an Indo-European lineage, right, of ancient Europe, and complete by R1B, no doubt, no doubt. And that's why IJK is super important, brother. That's why IJK is very, very important. Very, 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 very important. Very important. And I'm gonna end this like this to get a good understanding of it, because I want to have a little more open days where we just go over these little snippets, different mutations. The reason why, right? The reason why we're going about this family tree like this is because it's being oppressed. If someone says it's not being oppressed, they haven't looked into it yet. They haven't looked into the studies of this line, right? And someone will say, "What do you mean by oppressed?" Right? Notice something. Notice something. If I go to the root node here, now if I go to M2, it's M2 that's being oppressed, directly M2. I don't know why. I don't know why. It's probably because they have a snip on them that actually links them to the Jews. But notice that this line right here is very diverse. No, it got some lines here and some here in these different areas, right? It's not like a large line that's Indo-European. It's not originally Indo-European, right? It doesn't have a scattered group that scattered these areas. It's really mostly focused around these areas here. Notice it's also over here, but that's only one few, and it's over here, but that's only a few. There shouldn't be a large group there. There shouldn't be a majority there. And also the ones that we have seen being sent for the modern SNPs down here. So we, of course, see it moving throughout these areas. That's one of the most important things, that we have to find them over here because of the Portuguese persecutions of the last stages. The last stage is the most important. The Arabians pushing the Jews out of Arabia, right? And the fact that we know that the Jews been going into the areas of Africa. So we know that they also were settled here by not just the part of the Jews being allowed to go down, but that the fact that the Jews were persecuted by the Portuguese. It was the Portuguese that started the slave trade, right? That's a very important historical fact to know about. That it was them that started the slave trade in ties with Goa of India, and they moved even individuals over here to these islands over here and over here, and not only that, but over here in different areas. And that was the Jews they were persecuting that were went into these areas. But the SNPs, the reason why we got to look into the SNPs and the 2022 SNPs that we found, because we know that if you look at the picture of E1, right? Because notice that's M2. M2 is a young SNP. It's not even Neolithic. That's a young SNP. You can mostly find it in not basically the Iron Age. And if we go back to V38, right? So V38 has a son. So V38 has a son, E-M329, and this total family is mostly in Arabia and some places of Abyssinia. If I just show that, right, this family right here, notice that it'll have connections to Abyssinia and Arabia. So it has connection to Arabia. So you can see it here in Arabia, but notice there's some in down here in Ethiopia. You have a little bit in Ethiopia, but you have mostly it in here, some over here, this whole family line. But if I go to V38's whole family, you can see obviously you're going to have some portions spread about, right? They're all spread about. But now if we look at some root nodes, right? Because now if we go back and look at some root nodes, we'll start noticing that we'll have certain SNPs that will tie families together, like P2. So P2 is kind of interesting because P2 ties E1B1B, E1B1C, and E1B1A together. It ties pretty much all the E1B1 sons together. And notice that once you put P2 on the chart, it makes this lineage around this area. It makes those M2s look like nothing. It makes those M2s that were found in Africa look like they weren't that much in Africa. And in fact, most of them are modern. Most of them that are in Africa are modern, and most of this family is actually in Arabia. That's why this line is interesting, because it also still stretches up in these areas. This is also including E1B1B. So E1B1B is more older and larger than E1B1A. So when you put it on the chart with it, it makes those 1B1s that were in Africa almost faded. Like they're barely even there, because you got most of them here. That's important. That kind of gives us a major picture. And if you go back all the way to the whole node of E1, right, you see the whole picture of E1 itself. So this is involving E2, E1A, right? That makes it even more clear that this line is this middle area here. That makes it even more clear. And we can see obviously it spread into different areas. So that's very important. So we can see that. And now if we go one more node at the total family of D and E, we can see a total of the D and a total of the E branches. And it's interesting, if you look at the D itself, you notice something interesting about the D group, that the D group is all the way over here. The D group is stretching all the way over here. So it's kind of interesting to note that if this was a family of Africans, why did its SNPs mostly settle in Eurasia, in the areas of Arabia, and areas of pretty much what you will see going on these other continents up here? So I believe that it's important to know that, like the Bible says, that they had split from the mountains of Ararat, and then they went into different areas. In fact, there's early writings about this Arata, where they had walked across this little area and then they had divided. Something had happened when they walked across this little place, and something happened that caused the people to divide. Something happened that caused the people to divide. They got into it. Something happened, and they all scattered aboard to different areas. That's something that's important to know, that they split, divided, separated, that they was mostly settled across these coastal areas, that you probably find early evidence of modern humans in these little areas, and that's what we find. That's why this line actually splits, separates, and this line goes over here, this D group. That's why this family is interesting, because it makes you wonder, what's the real picture here, because of where it's mostly settled at. The largest group, the largest number of them, are settled in the Middle Arabian area. That's very important. That's very, very important to kind of get understanding. But if we look at CT, right? CT's families under CT is DE and CF groups. So CF, remember CF P143, this CF group right here, this is one family. So these are two SNPs. There's a separation. So CT makes DE, which is one family, and CT makes CF, which is another family. That the SNPs, right? Remember I said of F star of F dash MA9 rises your GHIJK, your HIJK, your IJK, which makes your IJ, which makes your I and J groups. So remember, IJK is a father that makes IJ and K groups. So that's important. And if we want to get a good understanding of IJK, to see what IJK looks like, here it is. So that's probably why you'll find some in these areas, because IJK as a whole group mostly settled in Eurasia. I mean, mostly in these areas, So you will have more groups of it up here, but some of them will come down, right? Especially in modern times with all the Ottoman persecutions, and all the different persecutions of the land, right? It wasn't Israelites that was ruling that land to these days. It was actually some other peoples ruling that land to these days. So that's very important to know about the conquests of time that happened in time. But it all starts with our Araxis culture and to the Gasulian culture and all that we get those changing up that happens there during the Neolithic. That's going to be very important to know. So F comes from CF. So the three splits is A and B, which is one family. D and E, YAP groups, that's another family, the YAP plus groups. And there's your CF groups, which is one family. So as long as you remember what you're seeing here, you'll understand. So as long as you remember this, you'll understand it. So if someone just says the T are Jews, they gotta answer, is K Shemites? If K is not Shemites, then T is not Jews, because that makes all these that would make everything under K. If they said this was Shemites, that would make P's and R's and Q's and all these other groups Jews, but they're not. Those aren't Jews. And if they try to say J are Jews, they gotta explain as IJ Jews. And if they say IJ is Jews, then they have some explaining to do, because IJ comes from IJK. And are IJK Shemites? If they say IJK is Shemites, then K comes from IJK. That means all these will be Shemites. Are all these Shemites? Someone can try to say that. I never see no one say that before. But if someone says, I are pure blood Shemites from Abraham, and J, or they say J is pure blood Shemites from Abraham, and they say T are pure blood Shemites from Abraham, then you know what they just did? They have no Japheth anywhere. Their design would have no Japheth. There would be no Japheth. Because what are they gonna do? Make A and B Japheth? Make D and E Japheth? These are the groups that they kind of like, they say either African or mid high African plate, right? So who would be our Japheth, right? Which one would be Japheth? We know IJK is Japheth. That's important. IJK is the lines of Japheth. GHIJK, HIJK, IJK from F-M89. That's important to know. That's just important to know for the truth, right? So that was a misconception that was going on, that a lot of geneticists are still bumping heads at. Which one are the Jews, right? A lot of people know that J are Indo-European. A lot of them will try to say they're Jews, but they will never admit to a monophylactic family of Shem, because a monophylactic family of Shem requires a man to be constantly born from the same man, biblically speaking. So that means they have to be of Shem, right, of Abraham and such. So that's something that means that this SNP is the most accountable SNP for their chart. Notice how almost anyone who tries to say J or T are Jews, or any other group under this group is Jews, they never talk about IJK. Notice that, because IJK is the stump. It's the stump for trying to make any of these Jews. IJK, remember that. IJK is the most important. That makes these are not Jews. Anything that comes from this is not. They're not Jews. It's just not. It's impossible, because it's highly Indo-European. It was in Europe for a long time. It would not be a line that would be, in a sense, the rise of the Afro-Asiatic Semitic Hebrew Abraham. Because remember, that's what the family of Hebrew comes from. It comes from Afro-Asiatic Semitic, which is not from North. That means it would have been processed and growing somewhere close to the high areas of the African plate and the Arabian plate. That's what we should expect to find that Afro-Asiatic developments around the African plate and Arabian plate. That's important. Very, very important, because we can follow that linguistic family throughout that whole process. But this one is more connected to like Nordic, different early Indo-European, Indo-Iranian languages and things like that. That's what it would be more towards, is that it would be a northern nation that would have came and moved downwards. But it would have been mostly early northern line monophylactically Japheth, to make it understood. But all of. But that's why we went over this, to kind of make the thing understood. So I'm gonna end it like that on that note. That's why keeping a map, historical documents, looking at the information, it paints a really interesting picture. When we look at it, it paints a very interesting picture over these things. Any questions? Any stuff? Let's look at them real fast before we take off. Interesting that AM13. I want to show real fast before I end this. This is I don't know what line we believe to be Hamites. Look up this line. AM13. Look up AM13, and you'll find out a line of ancient Hamites. You can find ancient times in the lands of obviously not just Africa, but areas of Arabia. You can see here. Look at this. This is AM13. You can see it has some areas over here as well. These are the ones who I would believe to have ties to the Sabaeans. AM13. So you can see that obviously has some connections over there. Right. So location. Remember, location doesn't tell us who they are, it's the haplogroup that we got to look at. So remember, we already went over this. A0-T does not actually make any of the CT lines. That's important. These are actually descendant from those BT lines. So that's important. So remember, BT and CT split. But these ones are going to be the ones, like we said, in the areas of Turkey and other places, because these would be the early Hittites. These would be the original Hamites, right? If you want to find the original Hamites, this would be what we would describe as the said original Hamitic lines. That's what this line would be. Most settled in this area. If you're curious, right? If someone's curious, it would be this, right? Just to make it understood. But you gotta be careful on the mutation, because this line actually descends from BT. It doesn't descend into BT, right? That's important to know. We already went over this when we talked about the geneticist breakdown of the actual mutations and everything. Just putting them down on, this is a normal chart. This is not an unrooted chart. You got to look at an unrooted chart and look at a root of the chart to understand it. So you need two pieces to understand what's really going on here. Not a normal chart. This is called a normal chart. Normal chart is not telling you the way that they descend. So that's just important, because the way that descends is from BT and C, and then you get your A groups. So that's very, very, very important. This right here is important to know about, is that this is actually going to be, as you say, your A and B groups. Those are going to be the Hamitic groups. If someone's curious, all right? We went over it before, but I guess just to give a highlight, because someone mentioned that. Real fast. That's right. That's that. Yeah. Yeah. Those tests are expensive. Those tests are expensive. Yeah. That's right. That's right. That's right. So I'm gonna leave it like this, family. So we summer. What did we look at? I mostly wanted to point out three things that came out this week. Right. I'm just gonna close that. I'll put it. It was basically a writing talking about. It was found in Babylon that was talking about Jehoiachin, right? And if you know, a lot of Jews that had got scattered and sent to Spain actually say they are sons of Jehoiachin, or family lines of Jehoiachin, whatnot, and relations with that. And if you know, we had talked about that before, right? I don't need to point out the history, but you probably already know, right? Ben, how you say that? Ya Negro, right? You probably know about that. Just pointing out from this aside, a lot of people already know about this and whatnot. He's a Sephardic Jew. He's a Sephardic Jew that pretty much he was rewarded the name with one of his lands, Negro, right? They were pretty much some of those darker Jews that were still in the area, but they were the ones that came from the Babylonian captivities, right? Many people already know about this. It's deeper history into this. It's just a nice little summary and whatnot of it. But as you can see right here, they would be obviously direct descendant of those from Babylon. And that's why we was talking a little bit about Babylon earlier, because of some of these things, right? Very, very interesting stuff. And during Babylon, the Jews were scattered, right? So we went over the Ishmael papayas. We went over the tablets that were talking about Jehoiachin. And we know that obviously the Jews were sent back to the land later on by Cyrus, the Cyrus cylinder, the evidence of that. And we know that when the Jews were scattered about, we got evidence of them pretty much everywhere, all over and stuff. But we got to look at the snip carefully to the ones that we find in the monophylactic families and whatnot to see what we find. Some very interesting pinpoint stuff that I think is interesting. And we also point out some 2022 SNPs of M2. So with that, family, that's all I got for now. I'll put some meat in the description, as I know things that very, very deep, and sometimes some people can't eat all the meat. So we'll get back to some milk, try to get to some more scripture. So I'm doing a list for Isaiah. I want to get deep into some reading of Isaiah stuff. So I know it's important to keep up with that stuff. So with that, that's all I got for now. May you May you be beloved. And amen.